My ex-husband told our kids I abandoned them, when he was the one who cheated and left. They'll never know the truth, he smirked at the custody hearing, but I had been recording our phone calls for months. The judge heard everything. The day Diego walked out, he didn't just take his clothes and his pride. He took my children's truth with him. Mommy abandoned us, my 8-year-old daughter Mia whispered when I picked her up for my court-mandated weekend visit. Daddy said you didn't want us anymore. I knelt down, my heart shattering into pieces I'd never be able to count. That's not true, baby. Mommy would never leave you. Then why did you go away? My 6-year-old son Oliver asked, his eyes filled with the kind of confusion that comes from having your world torn apart by adults who are supposed to protect you. I couldn't explain that Daddy had been sleeping with his secretary for 2 years, that I'd found the hotel receipts tucked behind his insurance cards, the love letters hidden in his gym bag, the photos on his phone of them at restaurants I'd never been to, that he'd moved out the day I confronted him, then immediately filed for custody claiming I was an unfit mother who'd driven him away with my instability. The lies started immediately. Within hours of him leaving, my phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer demanding I vacate our home for the children's safety. By morning, he'd frozen our joint accounts and hired a private investigator to follow me, hoping to catch me doing something, anything, that would support his narrative of me being an unstable mother. Your mother is unstable, Diego had told the court-appointed mediator smoothly during our first session. She's been drinking heavily since I left. The children need stability, and unfortunately, she can't provide that in her current state. It was a masterpiece of manipulation wrapped in expensive suits and crocodile tears. He'd even brought witnesses, his mother and sister, who swore they'd seen me stumbling drunk at school pickup lines and parent-teacher conferences. The fact that I'd been on crutches from a sprained ankle for 3 weeks apparently escaped their selective memory. His sister testified that she'd smelled alcohol on my breath during Thanksgiving dinner. She conveniently forgot to mention that I'd been taking prescription cough syrup for bronchitis, something my medical records clearly showed. But Diego's lawyer dismissed as suspicious timing, but the family court system ate it up. After all, Diego was the successful businessman with the steady income and the pristine reputation in our small town. I was just the stay-at-home mom who'd let herself go and couldn't handle the pressure of marriage and motherhood. My lawyer, the one I could barely afford after Diego drained our joint accounts before I could react, was fresh out of law school and clearly overwhelmed by Diego's high-powered legal team. During depositions, Diego's attorney ran circles around her while she fumbled through objections that were consistently overruled. My client has always been the primary caregiver, she'd say weakly, her voice barely audible in the sterile conference room. Staying home doesn't make someone a good parent, Diego's lawyer would respond smoothly, adjusting his expensive tie. In fact, my client has documentation showing that Mrs. Rodriguez frequently left the children with babysitters while she, quote, took long walks to clear her head. Those walks had been my only escape from Diego's escalating emotional abuse during the final months of our marriage. He'd started questioning every decision I made, criticizing how I dressed the kids, monitoring my phone calls with friends, and making me feel like I was losing my mind. But in court, my desperate attempts at self-preservation became evidence of neglect and abandonment. The temporary custody hearing had been a disaster. The judge, a man in his 70s who'd made comments about traditional family values during previous cases, seemed predetermined to believe Diego's version of events. He awarded Diego temporary custody within 20 minutes, granting me only supervised visits on weekends. The custody hearing was scheduled for Friday. I'd already lost temporary custody except for those humiliating supervised weekend visits, where a court-appointed observer watched my every interaction with my own children. Diego's lawyer painted me as an alcoholic who'd driven my husband away with my erratic behavior and inability to maintain a stable home environment. They brought in expert witnesses, a child psychologist who'd never met me but testified about the typical patterns of maternal abandonment, a financial advisor who explained how my reckless spending had forced Diego to take control of the family finances. Even our former neighbor, who testified that she'd heard yelling coming from our house, though she couldn't say who was doing the yelling. During a recess, Diego cornered me in the courthouse hallway, his face twisted with that familiar smirk I'd learned to fear during our marriage, the same expression he'd worn when he'd gaslight me about conversations that never happened, money that mysteriously disappeared, and phone calls from women who were just clients. You should have just signed the papers quietly, he said, his voice low enough that his lawyer couldn't hear from across the hall. Taken your settlement and disappeared like I offered. Now the kids will grow up thinking their mother is a drunk who abandoned them for her own selfish reasons. They'll never know the truth about what really happened here. They deserve to know what kind of man their father really is, I whispered, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and desperation. He laughed, that cold, calculated sound that used to make me flinch during our worst fights. Prove it. It's your word against mine, and we both know who this court believes. I'm the stable parent with the steady job and the clean reputation. You're the crazy ex-wife who can't let go of the past. He leaned closer, his breath smelling like the expensive cologne he'd started wearing when the affair began. Even if you could prove I cheated, which you can't, Adultery doesn't matter in no-fault divorce states. The only thing that matters is who can provide the better home for the children. And honey, we both know that's not you. What Diego didn't realize was that I'd learned to be strategic during our marriage. When someone spends 3 years systematically convincing you that you're losing your mind, questioning your memory, and making you doubt your own perceptions, you start documenting everything just to prove your own sanity. For the past 3 months, every phone call between us had been recorded using an app my tech-savvy sister had helped me install on my phone. She'd shown me how to activate it automatically whenever his number called, ensuring I never missed a single conversation. Every threat, every lie, every moment of manipulation had been captured in crystal-clear digital audio. Every confession about his affair that he'd made because he thought it was safe, because no one would believe me anyway. Every time he'd bragged about how easy it was to manipulate the legal system. Every cruel laugh when he described how thoroughly he'd destroyed my credibility. I had recordings of him admitting to hiding assets in offshore accounts his lawyer didn't know about, bragging about how his poker buddies would testify to anything he asked them to say, describing in detail how he'd planted evidence of drinking in our house before I moved out, empty wine bottles in my closet, vodka hidden in my car's glove compartment. But the most damaging recordings were the ones where he talked about the children, how he'd convinced them that mommy had abandoned them because she didn't love them anymore, how he'd coached them on what to say if anyone asked about our marriage, how he'd promised them special treats if they remembered to tell the judge that mommy was always sad and sleeping. When court resumed after the recess, my lawyer seemed nervous as she announced that we had additional evidence to present. Diego's attorney immediately objected, claiming it was too late in the proceedings to introduce new materials and that any evidence should have been disclosed during discovery. Your Honor, my lawyer said, finding her confidence for the first time during this entire nightmare, this evidence directly contradicts the petitioner's claims and reveals deliberate deception of this court. Given the serious nature of these revelations, we believe the court needs to hear this before making any permanent custody decisions. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd replaced the previous judge after he'd retired mid-case, had a reputation for thorough investigation and zero tolerance for courtroom games. She allowed the evidence over Diego's attorney's increasingly frantic objections. As the first recording played through the courtroom speakers, Diego's face went from confident to confused to absolutely white. His lawyer frantically scribbled notes, probably calculating how quickly he could distance himself from this disaster without facing his own ethical violations. The courtroom heard Diego coaching our children to lie about me. They heard him admitting to his affair with Rebecca, his secretary, describing how he'd played the system perfectly by making me look unstable while positioning himself as the responsible parent. They heard him laughing about how easy it had been to convince everyone that I was the problem. The beauty of gaslighting, his voice echoed through the silent courtroom, is that once you get someone questioning their own reality, they'll believe anything you tell them. Even the courts eat it up when you present it right. But the most damaging recording was from 2 weeks earlier, when he'd called me drunk and furious because I dared to attend Oliver's soccer game during my supervised visit. The court-appointed supervisor had noted in her report that I'd been appropriately engaged and that the children had seemed happy to see me, which had apparently enraged Diego. "You think you can just show up and play happy mother?" He'd slurred into the phone, his words thick with alcohol and rage. "I've already won this thing, you stupid bitch. I've got the kids so confused they'll never want to live with you again. And even if they did, I've got enough manufactured dirt on you to keep them away forever." "What do you mean, manufactured?" I'd asked, knowing I was recording and praying he'd keep talking. "You want to know how easy it is to destroy someone's credibility?" He'd laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "I've got photos of prescription pill bottles in your medicine cabinet that I took out of context. I've got witnesses who'll swear they saw you drinking at school events, even though it was just sparkling cider. I've even got my mother ready to testify that you hit the kids, which is complete bullshit. But by the time anyone figures that out, they'll be old enough to choose for themselves. And they'll choose me." The silence in the courtroom was deafening when that recording ended. You could hear people shifting in their seats, the scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her machine, the hum of the air conditioning. Even the bailiff, who'd probably seen everything in his 20 years on the job, looked stunned. Diego's lawyer immediately requested a recess, but the judge denied it. She wanted to hear everything right then and there, while the evidence was fresh and before anyone could disappear or destroy additional proof. For the next hour, the court listened to months of Diego's manipulation, lies, and systematic destruction of my reputation. They heard him admit to planting evidence, bribing witnesses, and methodically alienating my children from me. They heard him describe his affair in graphic detail, laughing about how he'd convinced me I was paranoid when I'd started asking questions about his late nights and weekend business trips. One recording captured him talking to Rebecca about their plans for the future. "Once I get full custody, we can move wherever we want," he'd said. "The kids will forget about her eventually. Kids are resilient like that. We'll be like a real family, just the 4 of us." Another recording revealed his true feelings about fatherhood. Honestly, I never wanted kids in the first place, he'd confessed to his drinking buddy. But they're useful now. Nothing makes you look more sympathetic in court than being a devoted single father fighting for his children. When the recordings finally finished, the judge looked at Diego with barely contained disgust. In 30 years of marriage and family law, she said later, she'd rarely seen such a calculated campaign of parental alienation and systematic court deception. Mr. Rodriguez, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. In 30 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered such a deliberate and malicious campaign of deception. You have not only lied to this court repeatedly, but you have emotionally abused your children by manipulating their perceptions of their mother. Diego's lawyer tried to object, claiming the recordings were illegally obtained and should be inadmissible, but the judge cut him off with a wave of her hand. In this state, single-party consent recordings are admissible when they reveal criminal behavior or fraud upon the court, she said firmly. Your client has just admitted to perjury, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and emotional abuse of minor children. I am frankly surprised you're still sitting there instead of advising your client to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights. She turned to face Diego directly, and I saw him shrink back in his chair like a child caught in a lie. Furthermore, Mr. Rodriguez, coaching children to provide false testimony constitutes child abuse under state law. Systematically alienating children from a fit parent is considered psychological abuse. The room seemed to spin as I realized what was happening. After months of being painted as unstable, unfit, and abandoning, the truth was finally coming out. After months of being treated like a dangerous stranger to my own children, justice was finally being served. The judge continued, her voice growing more stern with each word. I'm ordering an immediate psychological evaluation for both children to assess the extent of the emotional damage from this manipulation. I'm also ordering a complete financial audit of both parties to determine the full extent of Mr. Rodriguez's asset hiding. And effective immediately, I'm awarding emergency custody to Mrs. Rodriguez, with Mr. Rodriguez's parental rights suspended, pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services. Diego shot to his feet, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking completely. You can't do this! Those recordings are taken out of context. She manipulated me. She's the one who— Sit down, the judge commanded, her voice thundering through the courtroom. You're already facing potential criminal charges for perjury and contempt of court. I strongly suggest you stop talking and seriously consider hiring a criminal defense attorney. As the bailiff approached Diego, who was now frantically whispering with his lawyer and threatening to appeal everything, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Vindication. Not just the satisfaction of being proven right, but the profound relief of knowing that my children would finally learn the truth. That evening, when I picked up Mia and Oliver from Diego's house under police supervision, they clung to me with desperate confusion. They'd been told that Daddy was in trouble and that they'd be staying with Mommy for a while, but they didn't understand what had happened or why everything was changing so suddenly. Daddy said you tricked the judge, Mia whispered as we drove to my small apartment, the one I'd barely been able to afford during the separation. No, sweetheart, I said gently, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Daddy was the one who wasn't telling the truth. But we're going to work through this together, okay? It's going to take time, but I'm never going anywhere again. The next few months were a blur of therapy sessions, court hearings, and slowly rebuilding trust with my children. Dr. Martinez, the child psychologist appointed by the court, explained that children who've been manipulated in custody disputes often experience something similar to Stockholm Syndrome. They begin to believe and defend the lies they've been told, even when those lies hurt them. Your children have been systematically taught to distrust their own memories and feelings, she explained during one of our sessions. They've been told that loving you is betraying their father. It's going to take time and patience to help them understand that they can love both parents without feeling guilty, and that none of this confusion is their fault. 3 months later, after extensive therapy for all of us, the children began to understand what had really happened. The process was heartbreaking, watching them realize that the father they'd trusted had been lying to them, manipulating them, using them as weapons against me. But it was also beautiful to see their natural love for me resurface as the artificial barriers Diego had constructed began to crumble. Diego was charged with multiple counts of perjury, contempt of court, and child endangerment. His business reputation crumbled when the recordings were leaked to local media, not by me, but by a court clerk who was horrified by what she'd heard. The man who'd once been respected as a successful businessman and devoted father was now known throughout our community as someone who'd psychologically abused his children for personal gain. His relationship with Rebecca fell apart within weeks. Apparently, learning that your boyfriend had manipulated his children and destroyed his ex-wife's reputation was a deal-breaker, even for someone who'd been complicit in the affair. She quit her job and moved to another state, leaving Diego alone with the wreckage of his choices. The therapy helped Mia and Oliver process their confusion and anger, but also their guilt. Dr. Martinez explained that children often blame themselves when parents manipulate them, feeling like they should have known better or been stronger. Your daddy was hurting inside, and hurt people sometimes hurt others, she told them during one session. That doesn't make what he did okay, And it's not your job to fix grown-up problems. You were just kids trying to survive in a very confusing situation. Oliver, now 7, looked up at me one day while we were making dinner together in our new house. The one I'd been able to afford after Diego was forced to pay proper child support and reimburse the assets he'd hidden. "Mommy, are you sad that Daddy lied about you?" I knelt down to his level, looking into those sweet brown eyes that had been filled with so much confusion and pain for so many months. "I'm sad that it happened, but I'm happy that we know the truth now. And I'm happiest that we're together." Mia appeared in the doorway, clutching the stuffed elephant she'd rediscovered in her old toy box, the one Diego had hidden away because it reminded him of better times with me. "Mommy, Doctor Martinez says we don't have to choose sides anymore." "That's right, baby," I said, pulling both children close. "You never should have been put in that position in the first place." Over the following months, we established new routines. Saturday morning pancakes became our tradition, something we'd never been allowed to do when Diego controlled our schedule. I taught Mia how to braid hair, something she'd been asking about for years, but Diego had dismissed as frivolous. Oliver discovered a love for reading that had been stifled when Diego insisted he focus only on practical skills, like sports and math. A year later, Diego attempted to regain visitation rights, claiming he'd undergone counseling and wanted to rebuild his relationship with the children. His new lawyer painted him as a reformed man who'd made mistakes in a moment of emotional crisis. The judge reviewed the case carefully, reading through reports from Diego's court-mandated counselor, the children's therapist, and a new psychological evaluation. She interviewed Mia and Oliver privately, asking them how they felt about potentially seeing their father again. Both children, now 9 and 8, had developed a clarity about the situation that was both heartbreaking and impressive. Mia told the judge that she loved her daddy, but was scared he would lie to her again. Oliver said he wasn't ready to see daddy yet, because he still had nightmares about being in trouble for loving mommy. Mr. Rodriguez has shown no genuine remorse for his actions, and no understanding of the psychological damage he inflicted on his children, the judge ruled. His counseling reports indicate he continues to minimize his behavior and blame external factors for his choices. Until he can demonstrate meaningful rehabilitation, accountability, and a genuine understanding of the harm he caused, he poses a continued threat to these children's emotional well-being. Diego's parental rights remained terminated. Today, Mia is 11 and Oliver is 9. They're thriving in school, in therapy, and in life. Mia has developed a passion for debate team. She says she wants to be a lawyer, to help other kids whose parents lie about them. Oliver has discovered he's gifted at storytelling and wants to write books about families who overcome difficult situations. They still ask difficult questions sometimes. Oliver wanted to know why Daddy chose Rebecca over our family. Mia wondered if she'd done something wrong that made Daddy want to hurt me. Each question breaks my heart a little, but Dr. Martinez has taught me how to answer honestly while protecting their emotional development. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love, I explain. That's not because of anything you did wrong. It's because Daddy was dealing with problems inside himself that he didn't know how to handle properly. The recordings that saved us are locked in a safe deposit box, along with all the legal documents from our case. I hope my children never need to hear them, but if they ever question what really happened, if Diego ever tries to rewrite history again, the truth will be waiting for them. My sister visits often now, proud that her tech expertise helped save our family. She's teaching me a basic coding, something that fills me with joy because Diego always said computers were too complicated for girls. Watching my daughter's confidence grow as she masters new skills is like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. Sometimes people in our small town ask me how I had the presence of mind to record everything during such a traumatic time. The answer is simple. When someone spends years systematically convincing you that you're losing your mind, questioning your memory, and making you doubt your own perceptions, you learn to document reality. It becomes a survival mechanism. It's the only way to prove, to yourself and to others, that your version of events actually happened. The financial audit revealed that Diego had hidden over $300,000 in assets, money that should have been part of our marital estate. The court ordered him to pay back child support, reimburse my legal fees, and provide a substantial settlement that allowed me to buy our new house and establish college funds for both children. His business never recovered from the scandal. Word spreads quickly in small towns, and clients don't want to work with someone who's been exposed as a manipulator and liar. He was forced to sell his company and take a job with a firm in another state, a significant step down from the prestigious position he'd once held. Rebecca, his former secretary and affair partner, had indeed moved away shortly after the trial. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd been horrified to learn the extent of his manipulation, claiming she'd thought our marriage was already over when their relationship began. Whether that was true or not didn't matter to me anymore. I'd moved beyond anger into acceptance and healing. Diego now works at a different company in a different city, living in a small apartment instead of the sprawling house we'd once shared. The last I heard, he was dating someone new, a woman with no children of her own. I found myself hoping she was documenting their conversations too, just in case. But mostly, I don't think about Diego anymore. My focus is entirely on my children and our future together. We're planning a trip to Disney World for Oliver's 10th birthday, something Diego had always said was a waste of money. Mia wants to take photography classes this summer. Oliver is excited about joining the school's creative writing club. These are the moments that matter. Helping with homework at the kitchen table, laughing at silly movies on Saturday nights, listening to their dreams and fears without judgment. These are the moments Diego stole from us with his lies and manipulation. These are the moments we're reclaiming one day at a time. 6 months ago, Oliver came home from school upset because a classmate had said something about divorce being bad for kids. He asked me if he and Mia were damaged because their parents weren't together anymore. You know what's bad for kids? I told him, pulling him onto my lap. Having parents who lie to them, who use them as weapons against each other, who teach them that love comes with conditions. What's good for kids is having at least one parent who tells them the truth, who protects them, and who loves them unconditionally. You and Mia have that. He thought about this for a moment, then nodded. Daddy used to say mean things about you, but they weren't true, were they? No, sweetheart, they weren't true. I'm glad we know the real story now, he said, hugging me tight. Me too, I thought. Me too. The healing process isn't linear. Some days are harder than others. Mia still has occasional nightmares about being taken away from me. Oliver sometimes asks if Daddy might come back and lie to them again, but overall, they're becoming the children they were always meant to be. Curious, creative, confident kids who know they're loved unconditionally. Dr. Martinez says that children who survive parental alienation often develop unusual resilience and empathy. They learn early that things aren't always what they seem, that truth matters, and that love shouldn't come with manipulation. In some ways, this terrible experience has given my children tools they'll use for the rest of their lives. Last week, Mia asked if she could write a letter to other kids going through custody battles. She wanted them to know that even when adults lie to them, even when everything feels confusing and scary, the truth will eventually come out. She wanted them to know that it's okay to love both parents while still recognizing when one of them is doing something wrong. Can we put it on the internet so kids everywhere can read it? She asked. Maybe when you're a little older, I said. But I think that's a wonderful idea. That night, I found myself thinking about all the other families going through what we'd experienced. How many mothers were being painted as unstable or abandoning? How many children were being manipulated into taking sides? How many fathers were using the court system as a weapon rather than focusing on what was best for their kids? The recordings that saved us weren't just evidence of Diego's lies. They were proof that the truth has power, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. They were proof that documentation matters, that believing in your own reality matters, and that sometimes the system does work when you give it the right information. I still have moments of anger about the time we lost, the trauma my children endured, the reputation I had to rebuild. But mostly, I feel grateful. Grateful that I trusted my instincts enough to start recording. Grateful for a judge who was willing to listen. Grateful for my sister's technical help and Dr. Martinez's guidance. Grateful that my children were young enough to heal from this experience rather than carry it into adulthood as permanent damage. The most important lesson I learned is that truth doesn't always win immediately, but it has staying power. Lies require constant maintenance. You have to keep track of what you said to whom. You have to recruit others to support your version of reality. You have to silence those who might contradict you. Truth just exists. It waits. And when the right moment comes, when someone is finally ready to listen, truth speaks for itself. 3 years have passed since that day in court. My children are thriving. They're in therapy, but it's no longer crisis management. It's growth and understanding. They know their story now, the real one, and they know they can trust me to tell them the truth, even when it's complicated or painful. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't started recording. Would Diego have gotten away with it? Would my children have grown up believing I'd abandoned them? Would I have spent the rest of my life being treated as the unstable ex-wife who couldn't handle the truth? The thought terrifies me, but it also strengthens my resolve to help other parents in similar situations. When people ask me for advice about difficult custody cases, I always say the same thing. Document everything, trust your instincts, and never stop fighting for your children's right to know the truth. Because in the end, the truth doesn't just set you free, it sets your children free too. And that's worth any amount of legal fees, stress, or heartache. That's worth everything. Now, when people ask me how my story ends, I tell them it doesn't. This isn't a conclusion, it's a beginning. Every day, my children and I are writing new chapters. Chapters about trust, healing, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. Chapters about standing up for what's right, even when the whole world seems against you. Chapters about the power of truth to cut through the darkest lies. And those are the chapters that matter most.